what's going on in the stock market. AI, OpenAI, Microsoft, Google, Facebook, all these NVIDIA and so forth are driving the stock market higher and higher. That's a bubble dynamic on its own. It's being driven by AI. That's not even the application of AI. That's the AI narrative around the stock market. So it's almost as if AI is doing double duty. It's the narrative is creating a stock market bubble, and the reality is priming it for a colossal collapse. So get ready for that.
Jim Rickards, welcome back to the channel.
Thank you, Dave. It's great to be with you.
Now, I, like many others, have been using AI and ChatGPT, and it has become heavily used in personal life and in businesses all across the globe. Downloaded heavily, used heavily. Primarily, it's a time saver, incredibly efficient, and will lower costs for businesses as well. I recently was able to read your book, MoneyGPT, AI and the Impact on the Global Economy. It's starting to make me consider how valuable that AI potentially is at this moment in time, and also for the future, in terms of how it might actually be used. Could you briefly explain to me the contents of the book and what motivated you to write it?
Sure. I'd be glad to, David. It's MoneyGPT, AI, and the threat to the global economy. The thing about writing a book, it's actually a long process. It hasn't changed much since maybe in millennia, but the publishing industry is kind of stuck in the 19th century. My publishers, Penguin Random House, have a very good relationship, but it takes time to write. It takes time to research. You can't just make things up. You got to actually write the book, and then there's a whole process of editing, copy editing, and then at some point it goes to the printers. You print it, box it, ship it, store it, and then deliver it to the buyer. But the point is, the whole process takes it can take a year and a half or 2 years. I mean, some books take 10 years to write, but let's just say a year and a half is a good time frame. And one of the questions my editor asked me before I write the book, she said, "Jim, great idea. We love the idea. But how do we know this will still be a hot topic when the book comes out? Because you got to look almost 2 years down the road." And her name is Nikki. I said, "Nikki, I promise you this will be as hot or hotter, actually bigger, when the book comes out. This is not going away, and this is very timely." And that has turned out to be the case. So what I do in the book, artificial intelligence and GPT, I mean, GPT is generative pre-trained transformers. We don't have to get in the weeds on that. It's just a particular kind of processing that allows basically you got college kids using GPT to write their essays and exams. And but by the way, I should put a disclaimer: I wrote the book. I didn't use GPT to write the book, although you actually will write a book if you wanted to, but I don't know how good the book will be. But a couple points. Number one, the topic is bigger than ever, and in two completely different ways. You mentioned this, Dave. It's here. This is not a book, 5 years, something bad's going to happen or something interesting is going to happen. It's here now. It will grow. It will become more powerful, but it's here now. You open your refrigerator and there's a little warning that said, "Time to change the water filter." Well, that's AI. It's monitoring the time and checking the water filter and telling you what to do. But it's everywhere, a dashboard of the automobile, and certainly in computers, but application apps, basically everything you can think of, it's there. Probably the most familiar versions are, Alexa and Siri. They have nice voices. They're very pleasant, very soothing. It's AI. I should make the point that there's nothing intelligent about AI. It's all math. There's no brain or simulated brain or digital brain in the human sense behind it. They can't do that, and that's a whole other topic we talk about a little bit in the book. It's all math. And it's the combination of large language models. Basically, when you use AI or GPT, you need what's called a training set, a set of materials that the computer plows through and processes to produce the output. Well, the training set today is the internet. You can actually buy the whole internet, billions of pages. Typically, developers use a subset. They say, "Well, gee, I only need I only need 1 billion pages instead of 20 billion, or as the case may be." You can tailor it a little bit, and they do, but it's an enormous amount of material. And then super fast processing. So NVIDIA is the leader, but AMD and Intel and others make these chips. And you just kind of go through all these word associations. You develop what they call a cloud of words. And when one word appears frequently in close conjunction with another word, according to the training set, the computer says, "Oh, those two words must go together, like hot day or cold day, whatever." And it kind of can talk to you and write. And that's a quick overview of what's behind it. But it's here now. The book is not a doom and gloom book. It does not say, "Oh, the world's coming to an end," or "computers are taking over." In fact, in the conclusion, I make the point with a lot of support that that's not going to happen. We are not going to end up in a world of super intelligence or advanced general intelligence where computers are taking over the world. And they actually asked some computers, like, "What would you do to improve life on the planet Earth?" And the computer says, "Kill all the humans," because the humans mess things up. That's kind of the assumption, and that's not going to happen. But it is. There are many versions of it here today. So what I focus on, I kind of stay in my lanes, which are capital markets, banking, investing on the one hand, and national security and intelligence on the other. So a long career and worked in commercial banks, investment banks, hedge funds, stock exchanges, et cetera. Mostly as a lawyer, but also as a credit officer. So I'm very, very immersed in that world, derivatives and so forth. But I've also done quite a bit on the intelligence side. I worked for the CIA, advised the Pentagon, the White House, and others, and the Federal Reserve and Treasury, et cetera. So I've got a foot in both camps. I'm not talking about medicine here. By the way, AI can probably cure some diseases that we've never been able to find cures for. Often it's taking a lot of molecules, maybe millions of molecules, molecular structures, and looking at correlations, different combinations, and saying, does this produce a beneficial result? Well, a human can do that, but kind of slowly. And with the computers can look at an exponentially larger set of correlations and say, "Hey, this might work. Why don't we experiment with it?" So that's one of the benefits of AI, and there are a lot of them. It is, as you mentioned in the intro, it is efficient and so forth. So that's the good side. And I talk about that. And again, I'm not bashing AI. It's here whether I like it or not, whether any of us like it or not. It's here. But I talk about some of the dangers, most of which are not talked about very much because. And I would describe the book as a warning. It's like don't get rid of AI, don't abolish AI, but understand the dangers, understand what you're signing up for when you do this. So let me give a very concrete example of that. So the stock market, we saw in March 2020, it fell 30% in 1 month. That was the largest, not the biggest crash in history, but the quickest crash in history of that magnitude. So what happens? So this is not rare. And what happens in a situation like that? Well, AI produces something called the fallacy of composition. Now, it sounds fancy, but I can explain it in plain English. So I'll give you an example. So you're at a football game, and you don't particularly like your seat, or you can't see as well as you might wish. So you stand up. Well, now you can see fine. You're like, "Hey, I got a great view. I can see everything." But what happens next? Well, the guy behind you stands up because he wants to see, and the person behind him, she stands up. And next thing you know, the entire stadium's on their feet, and nobody's better off. You're all worse off actually because you're standing. So the point is, it's a behavior that benefits an individual in an individual case, but produces adverse detrimental results when taken to a larger scale. That's the fallacy of composition. Now, what does that mean in terms of capital markets? Well, let's say the markets are crashing, and they do, for 100 reasons. We can invent reasons, but it happens all the time. An individual might say, "Well, I don't know what's going on here. I'm losing a lot of money on paper. I'm going to sell everything, go to cash, go to the sidelines, wait till it's over, and then I'll tiptoe back into the market." That's a perfectly rational approach for an individual. It's, you're trying to, not losing money is as important as making money. So sell early, go to cash, go to the sidelines, tiptoe back in when the coast is clear. That's a smart and individual strategy. But what happens if everybody in the market does the same thing? Well, we know what happens. You have all sellers, no buyers. Markets aren't just crashing, they're going straight down through the
Everyone's
floor.
running for the fire
Um,
exit.
Correct. And then you've got to, then you get into circuit breakers. They don't work. People queue up to sell as soon as the circuit breaker's over. It keeps going. And at the end of the day, if it's bad enough, the regulators will not just close the markets. They'll, for 15 minutes, which is what a circuit breaker does, they'll close the markets, indefinitely. And people say, well, that will never happen. Well, it has happened. The New York Stock Exchange was closed from
Mm.
August to December 1914 at the beginning of World War One. It was closed for 4 days. We're trading days after 9/11. So apart from weekends and holidays, those things do happen. So there's an example of a behavior that is good for the individual, but disastrous on a large scale. Now, that's not new. Those kinds of panics have been around forever. What is new, that we've harnessed AI to the individual trader in such a way that that will be accelerated and amplified. Because AI doesn't have any common sense. And by the way, intelligence is a misnomer. People say intelligence. There's no intelligence, no brain behind the curtain. It's math. It's pure math, and it's very, very important to understand that. So now what happens is, we're handing over our decision making to artificial intelligence. There are actually hedge funds that have launched to say we're not going to pick. We're going to let the artificial intelligence pick the stocks for us. And by the way, some of them have had some early success. It's often the case that if you're the only one doing it or you're early, you get some benefits. But again, as I described, as more and more people jump in, they'll all be on the same side of the boat, and it'll tip over. So the what you're doing basically is you're taking human nature, which hasn't changed in the history of civilization, but probably much longer than that, combining it with AI, which mimics it, putting it together and getting into a feedback loop that will amplify and accelerate the dangers I'm describing.
Mm.
That same thing is true in a banking panic. So we've all seen grainy black and white pictures of bank runs in the 1930s where you have mostly men in overcoats and fedoras in the rain lined up around the block trying to get their money out of the bank, which they're not going to do because the insiders already took the money. But we recall that from the Great Depression. This is exactly the same thing, but at much faster speeds, much faster scale. So now, an example would be in a bank run, you just take your iPhone, your Android out and say, move the money here, push, done. And then you text your friend, hey, get out while there's still time. He or she does the same thing, boom, done. But take it further. So actually, a lot of people have built-in instructions, built-in stop losses that will do that behind the curtain. You don't even have to do it yourself. It'll just happen because everyone's programmed. But if everyone's doing the same thing, and that's really the point, they are doing the same thing. Developers, hey, they're engineers, they're applied mathematicians. They know how to write this code and just do what I'm describing. Traders understand, good ones anyway, understand the dangers I'm describing,
Mm.
but they try to work together, but and I've been in the business a long time, it's basically usually unsuccessful. The engineers tend to dominate. They don't really understand markets no matter how much you explain it to them. And so they've got this, they're programmed to do what makes sense for an individual, but it's disastrous at scale.
My late father had an expression, which is if you only read what everybody else reads, you're only going to think what everyone else thinks. And this is kind of what you're suggesting here is with these large language models that that they're working off the same set of data. So therefore, the chances of them coming to the same conclusions are much greater. And when you put
That's
that into the sphere of banking or of markets, it's going to become self-perpetuating if it's driving it and drive a market more aggressively in a certain direction.
That's exactly right. And the book's nonfiction, of course, but in chapter 1, I have a scenario to describe how this plays out, just to make it real for the reader so they can see. And I have a couple different characters. One guy is a family office manager. Another couple of guys are market manipulators. They're criminals, but they know AI. They know how to do deep fakes and so forth. You have a central bankers on a plane, they can't get to them on time. Reporters, et cetera. And then, oh, Chinese intelligence are trying to disrupt the market. They're not even trying to make money. They're trying to destroy the markets. And the point I make is that there's no mastermind. It's not as if the Chinese cyber warriors are in touch with the market manipulators. It's not as if the market manipulators are in touch with the portfolio manager. It is the case that they're all acting individually using AI, using deepfakes, et cetera. And when you combine all these things, it is a very, very volatile and toxic mix. And this could happen very quickly. I also, but I never do those
Historically, I was
kinds
just
of
saying,
stuff.
if you were to go roll
Sorry.
back about 10 years ago, and having read that chapter in the book, if you'd read that chapter 10, 15 years ago, it would have seemed like some sort of a dystopian, futuristic view of the world. But all of the things that you actually talk about, the tools and the functionality is already there. It's a case of, given the opportunity, this is how that they could potentially be put into action.
That's right. Well, you can go back 10 or 15 years, and yeah, we all lived through that. But I can go back at this point 26 years to 1998. I was the general counsel of long-term capital management, and I witnessed that meltdown from the inside, and I
Mm,
negotiated the bailout. And what people don't know is like, okay, it was $4 billion, all cash, 72 hours, no due diligence, get it done. And there were, it was an army of lawyers. I was the lead lawyer on one side of the deal, but there were hundreds of lawyers involved. But my point being, people, we got the money in, and foamed the runways, and the engines were on fire, but we didn't crash the plane. But we came this close. People, it was Wellington said after Waterloo, he said it was a close run thing. That people don't realize we were just hours away from shutting every market in the world.
mm,
So I was a front row seat, firsthand witness. That was before AI, and that's really my point. Take those dangers, which are real, and you point to 2008, and that was real, and now combine it with the accelerant and the amplification of AI in the way we just talked about, and you see it's even more dangerous. Meanwhile, what's going on in the stock market? AI, OpenAI, Microsoft, Google, Facebook, all these NVIDIA and so forth are driving the stock market higher and higher. That's a bubble dynamic on its own. It's being driven by AI. That's not even the application of AI. That's the
mm.
AI narrative around the stock market. So it's almost as if AI is doing double duty. It's the narrative is creating a stock market bubble, and the reality is priming it for a colossal collapse. So get ready for that. And I talked to in the book, I explained to readers, kind of what they can do to help themselves. I also I never do scenarios like that without offering some solutions. I think that's, you almost have it. You can't just, I don't try to scare people. I try to warn people, but I also have some solutions. One of the solutions is a branch of science called cybernetics. And cybernetics comes from a Greek word, which in its origins means the helmsman, like
Hmm.
who's steering the boat. You're the helmsman. This goes back to the Odyssey. Um, and I'll give you again a concrete example. So let's say you're driving on ice. I live in the mountainside. If I end up on ice every now and then, well, if you slam on the brakes, the car's not going to stop. It's going to keep going, or it's going to spin or go out of control or go off the road. What you do in a difficult situation is you tap the brakes. Tap, 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 keep two hands on the wheel, stay focused, and hopefully the car will come to a safe stop. Well, let's apply that to markets. Right now, the circuit breakers, and they came out of the 1987 crash, and the stock market fell 20% in one day, not in a month or in a year, in
Mm.
one day. Um, but they set the circuit breakers. So the market goes down a certain amount. They close the markets for 15 minutes. Supposedly it gives people time to talk to each other. Hey, what do we do here, etc. Reopen. But if you hit the next circuit breaker, there's another 15-minute closure. And on the third circuit breaker, you shut the markets. So that's the equivalent of slamming on the brakes. But what about a system that works as follows? You're starting to go down. You're approaching what, at least today, is a circuit breaker. And you said, well, here's what we're going to do. We're going to throttle the sell orders. We're not going to close the markets, but if you put in massive sell orders, which in a panic everyone's doing, we're only going to execute 30% of them, not
Hmm.
100%. Give the buyers a little time to catch up. And then if it gets worse, all right, we're going to throttle it down some more. We're only going to let 10% of the sell orders, be matched with buy orders, et cetera. In other words, you're tapping the brakes instead of slamming the brakes.
Mm.
That's the kind of thing that could give the buyers, a chance to circle back. And in the old days, when we go back, 70s, 80s, even as late as the 90s, the New York Stock Exchange had a position similar to other markets called the specialist. The specialist was given a privilege, but they had a duty.
Mm.
The privilege was you were the exclusive market maker in a certain stock, and you got to see the back of the book. You saw what was, not just the best bid offer, but everything behind it. The duty was you were supposed to stand up to the market, meaning if there was a wave of sellers, you would be a buyer to kind of equilibrate things, or if there was a frenzy of buying, you would be a seller to kind of. That's tapping the brakes. That system is long gone. A good friend of mine was director of floor operations at the New York Stock Exchange. He's down on the floor, and I was down there with him one day, and he said, "Jim, don't think for a minute there's any liquidity on this floor.
Mm.
There isn't. We make a living, we do our jobs, but there's nothing here that's going to stop a panic from getting out of control." So again, cybernetics using computing power to mitigate the effect of other computing power is a way to hopefully resolve some of these situations. And then I talk about banking crises. A lot of people kind of conflate the capital markets and the banking system. They're two different things. They're very different, but you can have these kinds of bank runs using the same dynamic I described. And then finally, there's a chapter in the book on nuclear war fighting, because as I mentioned, I do national security and intelligence work. I've done that for quite a long time, and that has the same dangers, except we're not talking about losing money. We're talking about the end of life on Earth. But I started studying nuclear war fighting in the late 1960s. A lot of the top scholarship was done in the late 1950s, early 1960s, at the beginning of the Cold War, the atomic age. And the big scholars were Albert Roberta Wohlstetter, Paul Nitze, Henry Kissinger. But the biggest brain of all was Herman Kahn.
Mm.
And Herman Kahn came up with the idea of escalation. What he said was, nobody wakes up and says, "Oh, nice day, I think I'll start a nuclear war." That's not how it happens. The way it happens is you have two powers. One side provokes the other side responds. First side shoots back, etc. And you're on an escalatory ladder. By the way, this dynamic is playing out right now in Ukraine and the Middle East. That's this whole separate debate. I don't have to take sides. Neither does the audience. We all have our views, but there's no question about the fact that we're seeing escalation by both sides in both theaters, with nuclear powers all around the edges of Russia, United States, et cetera, and Israel. So what do you do when you're on that escalatory ladder, which Khan actually got it to over about 50 steps that he described separately. He said the first thing is realize you're on it. Realize that you are on an escalatory path to nuclear war. Number two, take a beat. Stop escalating. And number three, climb down the ladder, start de-escalating and back off from the danger. That's what happened in the Cuban Missile Crisis, and there are a couple other examples of that.
They're very human reactions to situations like that.
Correct.
And that's one of the points that you make in the book, which is really well made when you compare how the human and the emotional response to those situations, as opposed to a cold and calculated AI, that is
right,
where both sides is programmed with the same information.
That's right. And there were we're all pretty familiar with the Cuban Missile Crisis, and Khrushchev and Kennedy climbed down the ladder after reaching a point of danger. But there are a number of other instances, more than people realize. It would be pretty scary if you actually kind of went through all this, which I did. But there were two in the 1980s, and one was a case where the Soviets, the Soviet Union, basically Russia, had primitive versions of AI. They had a system called VRIAN, which was measuring to a whole lot of metrics, the relative power, economic and otherwise, of the U.S. and the Soviet Union. And they knew that the U.S. was kind of ahead, but they said when that advantage gets too big, when the U.S. is way ahead of the Soviet Union, that's a time when the U.S. would be more likely to start a nuclear war
Mhm.
because they would be coming out from a position of strength. And of course, if you do that, if the other guy's going to shoot, you shoot first. That's
Mhm.
that's that's another part of the escalatory danger. So their system was predicting that, and then there was one system that actually OKO was the code name, OKO, that gave a launch warning. It said U.S. missiles are coming in, they're aimed at the Soviet Union, launch. And there was a Soviet lieutenant colonel in the Soviet Army who got that. His job was to call his superiors, and if he had done that, they probably would have launched, because who wants to bet their country that you're not going to sit there and let the missiles come in? But he had worked on the system, and he knew it had flaws,
Mhm.
and he took it upon himself, in violations of his orders, not to call his superiors. It turned out that the launch warning came because of reflections from the sun on the Soviet radar, that they look like missiles,
Mhm.
but they weren't actually. And he used inference. He said, "Well, I'm only picking up 5 missiles." It turns out they weren't missiles, but I'm picking up 5 missiles. The U.S. wouldn't do that. If they were attacking, they would use 100 or 200.
Mhm.
So, but he took it upon himself. He disobeyed orders. He later became known as the man who saved the world. Now, a few years later, almost the same time, U.S. and NATO led by the U.S., were conducting a war game, and the war game was a nuclear attack. They weren't attacking, but they were saying, "Well, how would that play out? How would it work out? What can we learn?" The Soviets, the KGB, had concluded that the U.S. was getting ready to launch an attack on their own, based on their own AI system.
Mhm.
So when they saw NATO acting like they were getting ready to launch, and they had concluded that the U.S. probably was going to launch, they escalated. They activated their missiles and got their bombers on the runways, and they were getting close to attacking us, because you always want to strike first. There was a U.S. lieutenant general who took it upon himself to de-escalate the war game. He said, "Time out. Let's stop doing this." The Soviets picked it up, and then again we backed away from nuclear war. But here's my point, Dave. In both cases, it was a lieutenant colonel and a lieutenant general who disobeyed orders. Who
Mhm.
Now, why did they do that? What were they relying on? Well, they were relying on gut instinct, a hunch, and common sense. AI cannot do that. AI, as you kind of get into, go back to Aristotle in terms of the history of logic, but computers can do deductive logic,
Mhm.
which is a major premise, a minor premise, and a conclusion. Computers can do inductive logic, which is you look at a whole lot of examples and you infer, well, gee, this must be how the world is, because I see it everywhere. But there's a third branch called abductive logic, and that's a whole other. That's been around for. There's this guy Charles Sanders Peirce who invented it. He was 100 years ahead of his time. We're finally catching up to him. But abductive logic, there's a lot to it, but the simple version is common sense,
Mhm.
intuition, and gut instinct. Computers cannot be programmed to use abductive logic. It may be non-programmable. And so my point is, if you put artificial intelligence in the nuclear kill chain, it's going to use the other branches of logic and keep escalating at a time when you need somebody like the people I mentioned to back off. But the computer can't do that. So the warning is, keep AI out of the nuclear kill chain.
Mhm.
If you want to have it as a research tool or something, but keep it out of that decision-making process, or you will risk a flash nuclear in the end of the human race. So hopefully the
And
Pentagon reads it.
one of the things you said at the beginning is AI is based purely on mathematics. So
Correct.
there is no disobeying the orders in mathematics. So
That's exactly right.
you've lost that that ability to tamp things down and calm things down in situations like that. One of the other things, so there's kind of there's the human element and the emotional element. That's what's lacking. And also, what you said is that all of these language models are looking at the same set of data, so they'll come to the
Right.
same conclusions. But you also highlight that there's a flaw in the data sets that they're looking at because they're subject to bias and censorship. You might talk to that for a moment as to how that actually how you arrived at that and what impact that has.
Sure. I have a whole chapter on that. It's bias, censorship, and confabulation, which is a fancy name for like making things up. But I can give some concrete examples. So recently, this is all just in the past few months, I was able to get it in the book, just before the deadline. Google announced an AI system, but more particularly a GPT system.
Mm.
These are the ones that talk to you and produce images and all that, called Gemini. And so they roll it out. So people noticed immediately if you said, yeah, give me a picture of uh, the Vatican or Empire State Building. It'll do that. Like, yeah, here's the Empire State Building. If you say, give me a picture of Tiananmen Square, it won't. It's actually programmed to avoid controversial topics that could offend the Chinese. But at a deeper level, somebody using the GPT, you give it a prompt, that's your question basically, and said, give me an image of a pope. And the GPT returned female popes in papal vestments. Uh, well, if you want to debate that, that's fine. But there have been 266 popes in 2,000 years, and they were all men. Whether you like that or not, that's just take that to the bar. But there are no female popes. Somebody else asked, give me a picture of a Viking, and it produced a black Viking. Well, been to Scandinavia, they're all white and blonde. I mean, there are no black Vikings. It's just, again, it's just a fact. So people start looking into that, and Google, whether it's got Sergey Brin's like, oh, malfunction or whatever. No, it didn't. It worked exactly as it was programmed to do. But here's the program. There's something called prompt injection.
Mm.
So prompt injection is you give it a prompt, but the system takes your prompt and twists it or changes it to achieve some policy or a goal of the Google engineers of the world that they would like to see.
Mm.
So, for example, you say, please give me an image of a pope, and the computer turns it into, please give me an image of a pope in a world of diversity, equity, and inclusion where everyone has the same opportunity to do everything. Well, if you ask that question, you'll get a female pope or a black Viking. But that wasn't the question you asked. So the Google engineers inject conditions, biases, basically, into a categorical question to produce a desired result. There's only one problem with it, which is it's false, and the result is just not true. But they're sort of targeting. They say we're cleaning up bias. There's been bias against women in the Catholic Church. Again, take it to the bar. But we're going to correct for that with this prompt injection I just described. The problem is you produce a false result, and college kids are doing all their essays on this. If you, this is apparent to a subject matter expert. I've studied, I'm Catholic. I know how many popes there have been, but if you have to be a subject matter expert to pick up the false output of the GPT system, what good is the system in the first place? Number one. Number two, what about all the people who are not subject matter experts who take it at face value and have been completely misled? So what's happening is, in an effort to clean up bias, is part of human nature, been around forever. And some bias, this is why we're still alive. Bias is extremely useful as a survival tactic. If I'm biased against saber-toothed tigers, that's a good thing because I'll avoid one and maybe I'll survive and feed my family. Some bias is repugnant. It's absolutely repugnant, evil. Don't dispute that, but it's real. And so when they go about cleaning up biases that they don't like, all they're really doing is substituting their own bias for the bias they don't like, building into the training sets as you described. And I talked to the top guy in this, Gilman Louie. He's got a very, very successful career in Silicon Valley and a very top figure in the intelligence community. I worked with him in the intelligence community. He financed, CIA has a private equity fund, believe it or not, and they financed one of my AI systems that I built a while ago. But he said, yeah, let it roll, meaning come out with the truth. Let's rely on education, fairness, debate, and common sense to see a bad bias when we see it and know what it is, but say, hey, it's real, it was around, as opposed to substituting your judgment for other people's judgment, and in the process creating new biases, which in the wrong way maybe is misleading as what you're cleaning up. So it's a big subject, and I do cover it. So again, the book is very accessible. I mean, you can fill it up with jargon if you want, but I avoid that. I do not dumb it down, but I do use examples in plain English to kind of make it very accessible. But when you read it, you should be don't bash AI, but be warned. And one of the points I make, Dave, is that if right now, stocks, bonds, commodities, derivatives, they're all digital.
Yes.
They're all digital. I mean, with some
this is
exceptions.
where what I wanted to ask is, if having read the book, what is it you can do? First of all, what do you think the impact on financial markets will be? Do you think that we're close to something like some of the events that you were talking about? And then also, what is it you can actually do to protect yourself against these types of events?
Great. Well, we are dangerously close. And again, I explained that in a lot of detail. It could happen tomorrow. I'm not predicting it will happen tomorrow, but if you said, could it happen tomorrow? The answer is absolutely yes. We've had some close calls recently, including the Silicon Valley Bank, Credit Suisse, successive bank panics in the spring of 2023. And of course, we all know what happened and that was partly driven by AI because by then AI was very much in place. So we've had our warnings, and we're very close, and it could happen tomorrow. In terms of what you can do about it, you have to have part of your portfolio outside the digital realm. If the digital realm is automated, affected with AI, subject to all the processes we've been talking about, how do you dodge that bullet? Again, you can use cybernetics or whatever, but that's up to the governments and the regulators.
Mm.
The answer is have some assets that are non-digital: gold, silver, fine art, land, natural resources. There are a list of things where you actually own the thing. And it's, if it was safe storage, and there could be some carry costs and all that, that's all normal. But by the way, this is how Russia has survived US sanctions. Elvira Nabiullina, who's the head of the Central Bank of Russia, in my view, she's the only central banker in the world who actually knows what she's doing. But over 10 years, and I warned the Pentagon about this in 2009, over 10 years, she put 25% of the Russian reserves in gold, physical
Hmm.
bullion in safe storage inside Russia. And so when the U.S. froze the Russian assets, the U.S. froze about $300 billion of U.S. Treasury securities lawfully purchased by Russia, held in digital custody in Euroclear in Brussels. Most of them, or two-thirds of them anyway. Those have been frozen, and the U.S. is now in the process of stealing them to finance loans to Ukraine.
Hmm.
Again, big topic. We'll leave that for another day. But the reason Russia is not wiped out, the reason the Russian economy is actually outperforming the U.S. economy right now is partly because she put 25% of the assets in solid gold. And by the way, and as you know, you're an expert. The price of gold has doubled. Well, it's up 70% in the past 2 years, and doubled in a slightly longer time frame. Russia has made as much money on the gold on a mark-to-market basis as they've suffered losses in the treasury securities, because they've made over $50 billion of mark-to-market profits on their gold. But the point is, it's digital, so the U.S. can't touch it, can't freeze it, can't interdict it, et cetera. And those assets are good, and it's money good. So I recommend people have gold in their portfolios. I recommend 10%. Seasoned to taste. If you want more, that's fine. But 10% in a meltdown scenario of the kind I warned about in the book, you'll be fine. In fact, the dollar price of gold will probably soar, because people will be flocking to gold. But for the people who got in early, they'll do fine.
MoneyGPT, AI, and the threat to the global economy. It's available from when?
Publication date is November 12th, but you can order it if you see this before November 12th. You can order it on Amazon right now. It's available for pre-order. They have a very nice price guarantee. They say people don't like to pre-order books. Like Amazon says, well, if the price goes down, we'll give you the lower price. We don't charge your credit card. You'll have it on your doorstep on November 12th. So yeah, it's available for sale now on Amazon and Barnes and Noble and other leading booksellers.
I'm going to stick a link then to that Amazon link rather in the show notes below this. I've read the book. I've thoroughly enjoyed it. It's scary in parts. It's very enlightening. And I recommend that everybody reads it. Jim Rickards, thanks again for joining us.
Thanks.